A map can be a useful guide. It accurately represents reality. But as Alfred Korzybski said, the map is not the territory. It's a description of the territory. I can use this map to accurately guide my hike right now, but it would be foolish to mistake these drawings, no matter how precise, for the actual trail in and of itself. And yet an argument can be made that this is exactly what we do when we mistake our perceptions of a physical world for what's really out there when we're not perceiving. We assume we see reality as it is. If I see this red apple here a foot away, there must really be a red apple a foot away. Because according to evolution by natural selection, it seems that accurate perception must enhance our evolutionary fitness, our ability to survive long enough to procreate. I perceive this apple accurately so that I can eat it and nourish myself. Natural selection must have favored that truthful perception. Our perception of sight must have evolved accordingly. But is that right? Does natural selection really favor true perceptions? Do we see things as they really are? Or is the world we perceive an illusion? Now we know that the world as an illusion is what Indian religions have told us for millennia. And idealist philosophers like Bernardo Kastrup would agree that our sense perceptions of the world only provide a description, like the drawings and measurements on a map, of a deeper reality. The physical world is, after all, according to science, merely a description using measurements. Down to the quantum level, our physical world can be described in terms of particles and force fields, with measurements of mass, charge, momentum, etc. But these measurements may only be a superficial description of a deeper reality. Real or not, however, what we normally perceive looking around definitely seems to be accurate. I can accurately predict the trajectory of throwing this apple into the garbage with my perception of sight. We have very successful scientific theories, and we can manipulate nature in amazing ways with our modern technologies. But it doesn't mean our perceptions show us what's real. It could all be just a useful fiction, one that works very well, but doesn't tell us exactly what the deeper reality is. In the case against reality, why evolution hid the truth from our eyes, Donald Hoffman says exactly that. He says we don't see reality, and he can prove it. He has a theorem called fitness beats truth that proves truth goes extinct when competing with fitness. This works off of one of our best scientific theories, the theory of evolution by natural selection. If you take that theory to be true, that we evolved to survive, then his theorem proves that our senses evolved purely to stay alive long enough to procreate. He gives the example of how our own senses don't perceive oxygen, and we didn't even discover it until 1772. Instead, our senses report fitness. We get a headache if there's too little oxygen, and lightheaded if there's too much. To prove his theorem, he used evolutionary game theory experiments. The experiments simulated what would happen with organisms that perceive the truth versus organisms that only perceive fitness functions for survival. And he found that natural selection drives organisms that perceive the truth to swift extinction. His experiments proved his theorem that fitness beats truth, that because of evolutionary pressures, our senses have evolved to show us fitness payoffs for survival in the physical world we see around us, and not the truth of what that physical world really is. Our perceptions only guide useful actions and don't tell us anything about objective reality, meaning what's there when we look away, when we're not perceiving. And since we perceive objects in terms of 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time, if perceptions don't show us the truth, reality must not be in terms of space, time, and object. So what we think we perceive isn't what's really there. It's nothing like the colors, shapes, sounds, and textures we experience. When we look away, the physical world vanishes.
Do you see a phone right there?
Now that may seem very counterintuitive, if not ridiculous. I mean, what this is saying is that against Einstein's protests, when we're not looking at it, the moon literally doesn't exist. It only physically exists when we look at it. We create the reality of the physical world when we perceive it. Bishop Berkeley may have been right all along. To be is to be perceived.
But that doesn't mean nothing is there if I look away. After all, the camera doesn't lie. If I take a picture behind me of the Hollywood sign without looking, it'll capture something. And it can be corroborated by me and anyone else who looks at the picture after. That's because something is there. There is an objective reality. It's just not the physical world we perceive. As Donald Hoffman jokes, he may not take an oncoming train literally, but he does take it seriously. There is an objective reality out there that we experience subjectively, and both can be considered real. I came here just for these train shots, by the way. I take these videos very seriously.
It would be too dismissive to say all of our experiences aren't real, but they may not be ultimately real in terms of objective reality. Donald considers objective reality to be what's there when not perceived. To him, no perception is veridical. No perception is true. According to him, what we perceive is a species-specific user interface, and we construct the physical world we see on the fly. To get a sense for this, he gives the example of the Necker cube. There is an objective reality to this drawing when we're not looking, but when we do look, either we create a reality where we see a cube with corner A in front, or we create a reality of a cube with corner B in front. This is a simple visual example of how we can have different subjective experiences from one underlying objective reality. And we can easily get a sense of this with how differently we must see things compared to a bat that sees with echolocation, or a hummingbird that sees ultraviolet light. Donald proposes the interface theory of perception. A user interface, like the desktop interface on my laptop, is useful because it does not resemble what it represents. For example, this blue folder isn't really a blue folder. The icon guides my behavior and doesn't show me what's really there. The icons on my desktop hide all the complexity of my computer, its diodes, resistors, and software. That's what makes the user interface useful, and that's what makes our sensory systems useful. Bernardo Kastrup presents another useful metaphor, that our senses are like the dials on a plane's dashboard. These indicators of speed, altitude, air pressure, etc. can be used to precisely fly the plane without the pilot seeing the reality of what's outside the windshield. Pilots can completely fly their planes without looking outside at the environment. They only need to rely on a dashboard of dials because it's an accurate representation of what's going on in the environment. But those dials look nothing like the reality outside. In the same way, what our senses show us may not be what's really there. But both Donald and Bernardo don't use the word illusion to describe our perceptions of a physical world. According to Bernardo, what we perceive may not be ultimately real, but it can be considered penultimately real. Not absolutely real, but at least relatively real. According to Donald, an illusion is a perception that fails to guide adaptive behavior. And just like in Bernardo's dashboard of dials example, our physical dials, our physical senses of sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, guide us very well. But what is the ultimate reality beyond those dials? The real world outside the plane. According to Donald and Bernardo, and according to millennia-old Eastern spiritual traditions, that reality is consciousness. Consciousness is fundamental.
But why does all this matter? Why does it matter if the physical world is not a standalone reality, and if consciousness is that fundamental reality? For me at least, it helps support my spiritual journey. It gives more credibility to the mind in creating our individual realities, and it validates the investigation of consciousness for self-realization, for enlightenment. And these are the topics I want to get into on this channel. Like and comment if this resonated with you, and subscribe below to follow me on my journey. See you next time.